Why should anyone care about your art? Most works that have ever been made remain invisible or are barely acknowledged. After all, for the vast majority of you that will ever live, your work isn't taking #1 at the box office, hung in an elite gallery, or topping Billboard charts. Even if it did manage to be popular, it's surely littered with technical flaws and will fall out of the public consciousness in an instant, proportional to the totality of the world's artistic endeavor. Maybe your gut reaction is to say, no, none of these things dictate the value of art. And I'd agree, but we sure as hell don't act like it. TikTok put our brains in a blender, brutalized our dopamine receptors, and said attention is king. Now this new dogma has infected every medium we participate in. Song snippets have become aesthetic landmarks to homogenize communication. Engagement editing has had YouTube in a chokehold since the voices are so loud that even a moment's reflection or eased pace have you tempted to drown out the noise. Am I communicating in a pretentious way, or has your literacy and reading comprehension been terminally impaired by brain rot? I grew up in unmoderated Counter-Strike lobbies and learned phrases unsavory for the human mind, and now abstract thought is the final boss of human communication. Of course this is going to rub off in the art that's made. Case closed then, we're cooked. Without making any claims regarding merit, I, and very likely many of you, are more accomplished now than Van Gogh ever was. In his entire lifetime, he only sold a single painting and considered himself a failure. But if he is so acclaimed now, why did it take 150 years to gain recognition? There is zero material difference in the paintings between now and then. But this is the truth about creating something. The relationship between popularity and merit is functionally non-existent. Meritocracy is a scam, and so many incredible works remain unmade because this lie is given more power than it deserves. Your new favorite film is probably sitting on some dude's desktop titled final_v12.pdf and will never be produced regardless of its quality. Why does it seem then that meritocracy is the judge, jury, and executioner as to whether or not you're a starving artist or an acclaimed talent? Since I'm a filmmaker, I can only speak of this from a perspective in this industry, but I know there is overlap in other mediums. In the feature film world, the first punch to the gut is coming to terms with the fact that you are probably too poor to self-fund your film, which means the second is having to go beg to someone who has loads of money, but there is a problem.
People who've amassed fortunes generally aren't okay with being cheated out of any of it.
So when you go to pitch the film, there becomes an understanding that the conversation is no longer about the merit of the art on its own. The new merit is in its value as a product. The characters that emerge on the page as a result of decades of life experience become spoken of in terms of what percentage of an audience they can reliably draw. The action beats you wrote as creative payoff to tension you've been meticulously crafting are renegotiated in terms of their marketability. The return on investment is the true artistic merit in this case, and as much as I hate it, I get it. The world is unbearably expensive, and you're asking someone with a rare abundance of resource to risk that for your own endeavor? Be for real. The route to being greenlit is a necessary evil. The question is what becomes okay for you to compromise. It's one thing to talk about something you've made in terms of its financial viability. It's another thing entirely to mold your expression to it. You are your voice. As an artist, the qualities that define your work are everything. Wes Anderson and Alejandro Inarritu are vastly different filmmakers by nearly every measure. Everything from the way frames are composed, to the direction of the performances draw a harsh line between their expression, to the point where it would be functionally impossible to mistake the two. At the core though, the tools used to craft their films are identical. Without the voice behind those tools and the canvas, there is nothing. Likely, the most existential threat to the voice of an artist is the rise of AI art. Because fundamentally every art piece made by a human is one formed by perspective. It's impossible for an AI to do anything but merely imitate that which is already made. Its iterations are algorithmic, not expressive. It cannot experience, it can only observe. It is, in the most aggressive sense of the word, hollow. but because it can imitate things, including the popular voices of other artists, and because an artist's voice is not a higher consideration than the bottom line, then an imitation in a corporate setting will do just fine. As time goes on, the technical flaws of AI will be ironed out. The time constraints and bottleneck that is a flesh and bone human going through revisions will become a redundancy of a past era. One day, it's a title card or an intro segment. Another day, a dead actor's voice is resurrected, and now we have sitting US senators gullible enough to flirt with the legitimacy of an obviously fabricated video. The gold standard now for these generative models is a persuasive realism. How well does it blend in? If an artist is not given space to experiment and fail, their voice will never develop. If they orient their expression only towards what the market wants, it will become a self-devouring cycle of regurgitation and repetition, a permanent cacophony of
jangling keys until it's unintelligible absurdity.
For the first time, I think I did this movie for a single audience member, which is me.
There is a filmmaker you have definitely heard of who has a short film you definitely haven't. Jared Hess is not a name most people could place off the top of their head, but if you say he's the guy who directed Napoleon Dynamite, that alone is enough for people to associate him with a distinctive voice and style in filmmaking. Everything he makes is, by every measure, a Jared Hess picture. It's simply unavoidable for his stylistic quirks to find their way into what he makes, and this isn't by accident. No algorithm or market research committee commissioned the Jared Hess feel. Most people know of the short film that preceded Napoleon Dynamite, Palooka. But in 2001, a year earlier, he directed a virtually unknown short film titled Cardboard Only. It's a strange film. By nearly every technical measure, it doesn't hold up. And if judged on that alone, it would be considered a failure. I love this film, not in spite of its technical shortcomings, but because everything about it is inescapably a result of a burgeoning distinct voice. The situational comedy of the film is completely devoid of plot. If anything, it's a demonstration of absurd and creative uses of free will. There is no end to anything that happens. Each sequence is for its own sake. None of this is to say that as time went on and the technical aspects became more refined, that his voice started to be muted. But you don't get the Jared Hess that made Napoleon Dynamite without Cardboard Only coming first. If you find yourself speculating on what the point of it was, it's already gone over your head. Why not? Because we are so inundated with a fire hose of content and a display of the best in any field in a perpetual unending stream, it becomes overwhelming to just start. Start with the acknowledgement that perfection is not and never will be a part of the process. Start not with the speculation of how viable your work will be in the marketplace or where it's going to rank in the SEO gauntlet. So then, are we all supposed to sacrifice our material well-being for the sake of artistic authenticity? We should hope to not end up starving artists, but the fear itself lives off of the assumption that money is the object and desire of your art form. There should be no shame in holding a job that provides for your material needs, whether or not it has anything to do with what you want to do. For many people, the marriage of your art and your paychecks can erode the desire to continue with the art in the first place. If any of us are lucky enough to have our creativity sustain our livelihoods, it should be considered a blessing. And the best case scenario in that instance is the money coming as a result of you making what you want to make and other people wanting to see it, rather than trading your creative freedom on a project you care about for a paycheck. Of course, for any project involving more than just you, there will have to be a level of compromise, but in that case, your job is to constantly be in negotiation with yourself on where the line is and what you're willing to sacrifice. There's a reason that Final Cut is lusted after by directors working on studio-level projects, and why so many people part ways with them over creative differences.
It's amazing to me that Fox is the #1 studio in the country because they're all such a bunch of morons.
A paradoxical fear as an artist is the impermanent nature of expression requiring it to be made permanent in order for it to be anything other than an idea. If the thing you want to make never leaves your head because it hasn't reached the threshold of perfection you want before the world interacts with it, you're not an artist, you're a daydreamer. One of my favorite quotes on writing is from Phoebe Waller-Bridge, where she shares the sobering truth that you may not write well every day, but you can always edit a bad page. You can't edit a blank page. The nuances with which I might write or edit can change daily. I know it did for this video. I at least have a habit of judging every minor nuance of change as a deficiency when really it's just a difference. These perspectives can be altered by mood, energy level, if there was another piece of art that impacted you deeply in recent memory. The point is that your mode of expression is not a beast to be domesticated and made predictable, but a new wrestle to be had every day, despite there being patterns that distinguish your voice from others. The beauty of a piece of art is not in its perfection, but in its distinctiveness. Its identity both as a result of who the artist was when they made it and the circumstances of the world it was made in. Your best work will not emerge as a result of near schizophrenic obsession over hiding the seams in your own work, but giving yourself space to fail forwards in an effort to cultivate your own artistic voice. To consider yourself as the most important audience member is not a nihilistic cry that nothing matters except for the things you care about. It's a recognition that because you're a person, what you make is inherently valuable and you owe it to yourself to treat it as such. So the only way I could reason out an ending to this video is to bring attention to a couple artists I believe deserve a much bigger audience, and their work absolutely deserves it. Godwin is an artist who does esoteric illustrations of religious stories and history within the Latter-day Saint faith tradition. His work is beautiful and captures a depth and reverence missing from much modern religious artwork. Elias Gold is a Navajo filmmaker and a close friend. I'm biased. Both telling and analyzing films from a uniquely indigenous perspective, a perspective that is sorely lacking within artistic discourse in general. And Slow Meadow has some beautifully moving atmospheric musical compositions. It's a solo music project, and the music definitely deserves more attention than it has currently. All artists are linked below. Thank you for watching.
Why don't you say, fuck it. I don't care if I'm pretentious or not pretentious, or if I've done it or I haven't done it. All I know is that I am going to see this movie.